Have you ever looked at your own life and thought, why do I keep destroying the very things I want most? You land the dream job, and suddenly can't get out of bed. You meet someone who truly sees you and then disappear without a word. You make a promise to change and break it the moment no one's watching. Maybe you've told yourself, I'm just broken. I'm weak. I always mess things up. But what if that voice inside wasn't trying to hurt you? What if it was trying to protect you? There's a part of you buried under years of silence that doesn't believe joy is safe, that learned love means pain, and success means being seen, then judged, then hurt. This video isn't here to fix you. Because you're not broken, you're divided, and something inside you wants to come home. There's a story I want to tell you, one that might sound a little like yours. And it starts in the quietest place right before everything falls apart. Daniel had everything that was supposed to mean happiness. A steady job in marketing, a downtown apartment with exposed brick walls, and a smile he wore so well, it fooled even himself. But when the lights went off and the apartment quieted, he sat alone on the edge of his bed, wondering why he felt like a fraud in his own life. There was no dramatic collapse, just a slow, silent unraveling. He stopped texting back, stopped showing up to dinners, stopped answering calls from the one person who truly loved him, because something inside him whispered, "This won't end well." And part of him believed it, because it always did. Every time things got close to real love, real success, real vulnerability, Daniel vanished, not from the world, but from himself. It felt like being trapped in a glass box, watching his life happen from the outside, unable to reach through and stop the crash. He'd tell himself stories to explain it. It's just burnout. I need more space. Too busy right now. But in truth, Daniel was terrified, because success came with pressure, love came with expectations. And being seen meant being judged. He didn't know it yet. But his sabotage wasn't random, it was ritual, a reflex he couldn't name, a loyalty to something invisible but deeply familiar. He remembered once, sitting across from his therapist, finally speaking the words he never dared say out loud. I ruin things, not because I want to, but because something in me panics right when I should feel safe. And the therapist didn't rush in with advice, didn't tell him to try harder, she just asked, when was the first time safety felt like danger? Daniel blinked, then blinked again. He didn't have an answer, but something cracked open, not in his mind, in his body. A tension he didn't realize he was holding started to shake loose. He didn't know it then, but that moment, that question, would become the first thread in unraveling everything he thought was wrong with him. The unraveling wasn't the end, it was the invitation. Daniel didn't return to therapy for weeks. He told himself he was too busy, that he'd circle back when things calmed down. But really, something inside him had been stirred, and he wasn't ready to face what it meant. He started waking up with this ache in his chest, like someone was knocking from the inside, not hard, but constant. One evening, he sat alone at his kitchen table. Old takeout boxes, cold coffee, unopened mail, and something inside whispered again, ask why. So he did. He opened his notebook, and at the top of the page he wrote, when was the first time I learned that my feelings were too much? The memory didn't come in words, it came in a room, a small one with sky blue wallpaper. A child sitting cross-legged on the floor, his mother's voice in the hallway, sharp, hurried, exhausted. He had been crying, not loudly, just enough to be heard, and she snapped. Why are you always so dramatic? Why can't you just be normal? Stop making everything about you. He remembered the door, how it shut, how the air changed. How silence suddenly meant safety. Daniel hadn't thought about that room in years. But now he couldn't unsee it. It wasn't just a memory, it was a blueprint. From that day forward, Daniel learned that emotions were dangerous, expression led to exile, and being too much meant being alone, so he became less visible, less honest, less of himself. He thought he was adapting, surviving, but really he was splitting. There was the Daniel who smiled, who performed, who gave everyone what they needed. And then there was the one he locked in that blue room. That version of him never stopped crying, never stopped knocking, never stopped asking, "Will you let me out?" Daniel didn't realize it yet. But the sabotage in his adult life was just that boy still trying to feel safe. The moment he saw this, something shifted. He stopped writing, closed the notebook, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not out loud, not to anyone else, just inward, because maybe it wasn't about fixing the part that cried too much. Maybe it was about listening. Until it no longer had to scream. If you've ever felt that silence, the kind that isn't peaceful but protective, you're not alone. That silence was never the solution. It was a signal. And the door to that room has always been waiting to be opened. It started with a name, not his, but the name of what had been pulling his strings for decades, shadow. Not the kind cast by sunlight, but the kind born from suppression, from exile, from all the pieces of Daniel that had been deemed unacceptable. He read Jung's words like they were written to him. The shadow is everything you refuse to see about yourself. And suddenly, his life made more sense. His anxiety before promotions, his need to run from intimacy, his ability to sabotage joy, none of it was random. It was calculated by a part of him he never meant to abandon. Daniel began to see the pattern. He didn't destroy things because he hated himself. He destroyed them because the shadow had learned. Joy is risky. Success is a setup. Love is a trap. And if it had to choose between pain it knows or happiness that might vanish, the shadow would always choose what's familiar, because the unknown is terrifying. Daniel looked back on moments he used to call failures: the breakup with Emma, the resignation from a job he fought to get, the silence after a big win. He thought he was weak, inconsistent, damaged, but now he saw something else. A part of him was still trying to protect the child, the one who learned early that being seen led to shame, so the shadow stepped in, not with malice, but with loyalty, loyalty to a rule written long ago. Don't shine too bright, don't feel too deeply, don't want too much, because wanting meant risking. And risking meant pain. He started journaling, not as Daniel, but as the shadow. "What are you afraid of?" he'd ask, and the answers came. "Afraid you'll be abandoned again. Afraid success will expose us. Afraid love will leave and this time we won't recover." He didn't dismiss these thoughts, didn't battle them with logic. He just listened. And for the first time, his shadow softened. Because like any abandoned part, it didn't need fixing. It needed witnessing. If you've ever felt like part of you is working against you, maybe it's not sabotage. Maybe it's protection gone misunderstood. The parts that derail your dreams might just be the ones that loved you first. The only way they knew how. And now they're waiting for a different kind of love, one that doesn't exile, but integrates. Daniel thought healing would feel like progress, like moving upward, forward out of the fog. But instead, it felt like falling backward into rooms he had sealed shut. He began having dreams, always the same hallway, always the same door at the end. Sometimes he opened it, sometimes he ran. Inside that door was a memory, not dramatic, not loud, just decisive. He was 9, it was his birthday. He had made a card for his dad, handwritten, messy, full of joy. He remembered handing it over with pride. And the silence that followed, his dad read it, barely smiled, then said, "You should focus more on your schoolwork." That's all, just one sentence. But for Daniel, it rewired everything. Joy became embarrassing, pride became dangerous, celebration became a risk. So he stopped reaching for those feelings. And decades later, that child still lived inside him, still braced for rejection anytime something good happened. Which is why, when Daniel found someone who loved him, really loved him, he pushed them away, because that kind of love, that kind of warmth felt too close to the burn. And his shadow, loyal as ever, whispered, "Trust it, it's not real. They'll leave once they see the truth." So Daniel left first. He thought it was self-sabotage, but it was. It was a nervous system trained for danger. It was trauma pretending to be intuition. Every time something good entered his life, his body braced for impact. And he couldn't tell the difference between anticipation and alarm. He started noticing it in small moments. A compliment at work, he'd deflect. A kind gesture from a friend, he'd joke it away. Because receiving made him visible, and visibility meant vulnerability. It wasn't rational, it was reflex. Daniel began to ask himself, what if safety was never safe for me? What if he had learned to find comfort in discomfort and fear in peace? That question haunted him. But it also opened a door, because if his body had learned this once, maybe it could learn something new. Maybe joy could feel safe. Maybe love didn't have to mean loss, but only if he stayed long enough to let it prove him wrong. If you've ever pulled away from someone, not because they hurt you, but because they didn't, you're not broken, you're protecting something. And maybe that part of you just needs to know. It's okay to stay, even when it's good, especially when it's good. Daniel began writing letters not to people, but to the parts of himself he had buried. He sat at the kitchen table one night, lit a candle, opened a blank page, and wrote, "To the rage I've always feared." His hand trembled. Rage wasn't something he knew how to name, let alone talk to. It had always felt like a monster, like a fire he couldn't control, so he kept it locked away. But now he tried something different. He asked, "What are you trying to tell me?" and waited. The words came slowly, like someone clearing their throat in the dark. "I'm tired of being ignored. I protected you. Every time they hurt you, I rose up. But you called me the enemy." Daniel paused, breathed, and nodded. Then he wrote another letter. "To the shame that lives in my spine." It took him 30 minutes to start, because how do you write to something that's always whispered, "You're not enough"? But again he asked, "What do you need from me?" And again an answer came, "I need to be named. I need to stop hiding. You carry me like poison. But I was only trying to keep you small enough to be safe." Daniel's eyes stung, his body ached, but he kept going, letter after letter, to fear, to grief, even to the numbness that blanketed everything when it got too much. He didn't try to solve anything, didn't argue, didn't judge, he just listened. And something began to shift, not suddenly, not loudly, but quietly, like the first leaf falling in autumn, signaling that a new season had begun. There was no grand breakthrough, no revelation that rewrote his past, just a softening, like the parts of him that had been screaming for years finally felt heard. The rage became less sharp, the shame less suffocating, the fear more like a child asking, "Is it okay now?" Daniel didn't feel healed, he felt honest. For the first time, his inner world wasn't a war zone, it was a conversation. And in that space, he began to trust himself again. If you've never tried writing to your pain, try. Don't aim for poetry. Don't worry about the right words. Just ask, what have you been trying to say? Then listen, not to fix, not to flee, but to witness. Because some wounds only stop bleeding when they're seen, not sealed, not silenced, just seen. His therapist once said, "Think of your psyche like a house." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A house?" "Yes," she smiled. "And the shadow lives in the basement." That image stayed with him for weeks. He couldn't stop picturing it. A house with many rooms, some bright, filled with plants and light, others dusty, cluttered, neglected. And then the basement. That was where he stored everything he didn't want to feel, the shame, the anger, the loneliness, all shoved into boxes with labels like, "Too much," "Not now." Later, he began to walk through that house in his mind, room by room. He'd enter the kitchen, where he learned to perform, smiling while simmering with resentment. The bedroom, where he pretended to sleep, but rehearsed every conversation from the day, wishing he'd spoken differently. The hallway lined with portraits of who he thought he should have been by now. And then he stood at the top of the basement stairs. He hesitated, not because it was dark, but because it was familiar. He had avoided it for so long he forgot what he was afraid of. But this time he opened the door and the air changed. He took the first step. It creaked. The second, colder now. By the third he could hear breathing, not menacing, not threatening, just there. He reached the bottom, turned on the light, and saw not a monster, just boxes, just memories, just echoes, old journals, school essays with red ink, a voicemail from a friend he ghosted, a birthday card he never sent. He sat down and started opening the boxes. Each one told a story, not of failure, but of fear, fear of not belonging, fear of being too much, fear of losing control. And yet there was something else. Buried beneath the rubble was a drawing, crayon, bold colors, a house with windows. And every light turned on, he stared at it and wept, not because it was sad, but because that version of him still existed. The one who believed the house could be whole. Daniel didn't leave the basement that day. He stayed, not to fix it, but to inhabit it, to let the light from upstairs reach even this room. If you've avoided parts of yourself not because they're ugly, but because they once felt unsafe, you're not alone. The basement isn't where your shadow punishes you, it's where it waits, for your return, for your presence, for your permission to be part of the home again. It took Daniel months to send the message, short, careful, just enough to say, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." Emma replied, warm, cautious, kind. They met for coffee on a rainy Sunday. The same cafe where they'd had their first date, same window seat, same scent of cinnamon and old books. But this time no performance, no armor, just two people carrying what was left, and what was still unspoken. Daniel didn't ask for a second chance. He didn't try to rewrite the past. He just said, "I want to own what I ran from." And then he paused. Let silence sit between them, not as a wall, but as a witness. He told her about the letters, the basement, the boy with the drawing, and Emma listened, not out of obligation, but because she recognized something. She too had shadows. We all do. At one point she placed her hand gently on the table and said, "I didn't need you to be perfect. I needed you to stay." Daniel didn't cry, he nodded. Because that line pierced deeper than any apology could reach. He realized then, healing isn't about being ready, it's about being real. He'd spent years waiting to become someone worthy of love, polished, predictable, safe. But what if love was never looking for perfection? What if it was just waiting for honesty? Daniel left the cafe feeling light, not because things were resolved, but because something in him had shifted. He could now walk through his life without hiding. He didn't need to ghost, didn't need to sabotage, didn't need to push people away before they could see the cracks, because he was learning. Cracks aren't the end. They're where the truth seeps through. In the days that followed, he started showing up differently. He listened more, apologized faster, took space when needed, but not out of fear, out of awareness. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, because he wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. He was standing fully, flawed, but free. If you've ever ruined something beautiful, not because it wasn't right, but because you didn't think you were, let this be your sign. You can return, not to fix, but to face. And when you do, you might just find that some people were never waiting for your perfection, only your presence. The morning was unremarkable. No breakthrough, no big revelation, just sunlight spilling through the blinds and Daniel breathing. He sat on the edge of his bed, feet on the floor, hands resting on his knees. No rush, no dread, no shadow whispering, "Something's wrong." Just stillness. It startled him, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. For so long, silence had been a threat. A prelude to panic, a space where the mind would spiral. But now it felt like peace, not the Instagram kind, not the mountain view with coffee kind, but the quiet knowing that nothing was missing, not in this breath, not in this moment. Daniel walked outside barefoot. The grass was cold, the air clean. He tilted his head to the sky, felt the light on his face, and didn't flinch. He smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing needed to be. He wasn't chasing a future. He wasn't haunted by a past. He was just here. It was the kind of moment you can't plan, can't manufacture, can't fake. The kind that arrives when you stop performing and start inhabiting. For the first time, Daniel felt what he used to only understand intellectually. You don't heal to become perfect. You heal to become present. And presence is enough. He went back inside, made coffee, read a few pages of a novel he'd been too anxious to finish. The world didn't change, but his way of being in it did. Later that day, he passed a mirror. Paused, not to fix his hair, not to check his expression, just to look. And for once, he didn't cringe, didn't brace, didn't edit. He just saw a man alive. A little tired, a little wiser, and somehow more himself than ever. If you've been waiting for peace to feel like a lightning bolt, you might miss it when it comes like a feather, light, soft. Barely noticeable, but absolutely real. Sometimes the greatest transformation isn't loud. It's the morning you wake up and don't hate yourself. The moment you realize you're no longer surviving, you're living slowly, gently, finally. Daniel once thought healing would be a finish line, a clean break from the pain, a new version of himself, polished, certain, unbothered. But real healing didn't look like that. It looked like waking up one morning feeling grounded, then later that night crumbling in the grocery store because the avocados were out of stock. It looked like being able to sit in silence with a friend, but flinching when they asked, "How are you really?" It looked like progress, then relapse. Then remembering healing isn't linear, it's cyclical, like seasons, like tides, like breath. Daniel started to see his triggers not as failures but as invitations. Every time fear showed up, it wasn't a sign he was broken. It was a chance to stay in his body, to stay with his breath, to stay with the part of him that was scared but no longer alone. He noticed his patterns, the way he still over-explained, still apologized for existing, still avoided eye contact when praised. But now, he met those moments with compassion, not criticism. He no longer tried to fix the shadow. He walked with it not as a burden, but as a companion. He called this integration, the practice of making space for all of himself. The bright, the broken, the becoming. Integration wasn't glamorous. It was Instagrammable. It was messy, unfolding, ordinary. It was choosing presence over performance, ownership over shame. Daniel began to speak differently, not louder, but clearer. He didn't need to justify his needs, didn't need to shrink his joy. He started saying things like, "That doesn't work for me. I need some time to process." Or simply, "No, not with guilt, but with grace." Because boundaries weren't walls anymore, they were invitations to meet him where he truly was. He realized he would never become someone who never got triggered. He would never be above pain or free from doubt. But he could become someone who stayed. Who stayed when it was hard, who stayed when it was boring, who stayed when the shadow returned and whispered, "Are we safe?" And instead of running, Daniel could now answer, "We are. We really are." If you've been waiting for the day you no longer feel afraid, maybe the goal isn't to erase the fear. Maybe it's to no longer believe it has the final word. Integration is not a destination, it's a relationship. And that relationship begins the moment you stop fighting yourself and start coming home. Daniel sat on his porch, a cup of tea warming his hands. Leaves rustled in the trees like quiet applause. He opened his notebook, not to journal this time, but to write one final letter, not to rage, not to fear, not to shame, but to the boy in the blue room, the one who had waited so patiently for someone to return. He wrote slowly, intentionally. "Hey, little man, I see you now. You never needed to be quieter, smaller, less emotional, less you. You were never too much. You were always exactly what you should have been. I'm sorry it took me this long to come back. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. You don't have to protect me anymore. You can rest. You were never the problem. You were the part of me still hoping, still loving, still believing in wholeness. And you were right. I'm proud of you. We're okay. Love me. Daniel closed the notebook. Tears didn't fall. They simply welled, like gratitude taking shape. He looked out at the horizon. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He no longer needed to outrun his past. He no longer feared being seen. He understood now. The parts of him that broke things weren't monsters. They were messengers. They were the cries of a child saying, "Will you finally see me?" And now that he had, the sabotage ended. Not with willpower, not with discipline, but with love and presence, and the quiet bravery of staying. If this story stirred something in you, if you too have a room you've left locked for too long, this is your invitation, not to rush, not to force, just to return, write the letter, sit with the silence, turn on the light, not to fight the shadow, but to listen to it, because healing doesn't start with fixing, it starts with seeing and then staying. And if you've read this far, maybe something in you is ready. Maybe your shadow has just been waiting to hear you say, "I'm here, and I'm not leaving, not this time."